Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Scott Samuelson and I'm a professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College on the Iowa City campus. My whole life, people have been saying that the humanities and the liberal arts in general are in crisis. The study of things like history, literature, and philosophy is probably always fighting an uphill battle. But it's looking like the humanities actually are in crisis right now. Almost every humanities field in higher education has experienced a precipitous drop in majors. To take just two examples, history is down about 45% from 2007. And the number of English majors has fallen by nearly half since the late 1990s. It seems that students and parents, and perhaps colleges and universities, are looking at higher education in a new way. Well, what is the point of higher education? Is it primarily for a job? Should it have other values? Can it afford to? We have a great panel on today to discuss the value of higher education in the humanities and beyond. To my left is Jonathon, the president of Cornell College. We're happy to have you on.
Thank you.
Gina Hausknecht, the John William King Professor of Literature and Creative Writing and Associate Dean for Student Academics at Coe College. Thanks for being on, Gina.
Thank you.
And Linn, a professor of Computer Science at Cornell College and also sometimes host here on Ethical Perspectives. Thanks for being on, Linn.
Thank you.
Well, Jonathon, let's start with you. So, what's the point of getting a liberal arts education? Why bother? Is there any value in studying things like French literature?
As a French literature major, I can say right off the bat for sure. It won't surprise you. This is a question that we ask ourselves every morning I get up, and that's probably one of the first things after the coffee I think about. Why are we doing this? And after 2008 and the economic recession, this question has become even more widespread, even more pressing. But without a doubt, the answer has to be yes. And I don't just say that because of the students we serve and the faculty and staff who really make this all happen. I say this from my own personal experiences. I mean, I'm sitting next to a professor of literature, a Shakespearean scholar. And when I think about what's past is prologue, right? You realize that at some level, if you don't understand the past, it's hard to think about what the future might predict or what might happen. Every issue that we confront has an ethical, moral component. Every event has a context. And if you don't have the ability to examine that context, it's hard to imagine creating a creative solution to it. Just one idea.
Yeah, well, and I want to come back to some of that, but Gina, let me ask you, I mean, so how important are things like the humanities to a college education? I mean, can't I get through college without having to deal with that stuff? I mean, shouldn't I just be training for some kind of good economic prospect for me, and can the humanities play any role in that? What role do they add?
So, I think we increasingly see students and families who are really thinking about the undergraduate degree in terms of the job that it's going to lead to. And when I say increasingly, I mean, I think this has always been true, but certainly when we look at the downturn in the humanities since the financial crisis, since 2008, I think we're seeing more and more of a very instrumentalist, transactional idea about what a college education is for. It's for that job. And sometimes at small liberal arts colleges, it's challenging because students are thinking about a certain career, and we don't necessarily have a major that has the name of that career or the name of that job, right? We don't have an architecture major at Coe. We don't have a health management major at Coe. But in fact, if you come to Coe or you go to Cornell, you can study. There's a wide variety of fields that are going to scaffold whatever that major is, and then you're going to have all kinds of experiences out in Cedar Rapids, perhaps in Mount Vernon, out and about, where you're going to learn how to put what you're learning into action. And moreover, you are going to train yourself both broadly and deeply so that not just do you get that first job in health management or whatever it may be when you first leave, but you're actually training yourself for jobs that don't exist, right? You're training yourself for career fields that don't exist now, or for movement in your career field, so that 20 years hence, you're going to do something that you could not imagine yourself doing. So I think, especially when we think about a liberal arts education, you're building this foundation of your imagination, in fact, how you can imagine yourself in the world, imagining what the world can look like and should look like, rather than training yourself to do one thing at the end of the 4 years.
Right. Well, Leon, I want you in on this conversation too. I mean, you know, you teach computer science. What do you see as the value of a humanities or liberal arts education in an overall education?
So very few students at age 17 or 18 years know what career they want. Some will think they know what they want, and they make a big investment, and then when they get there, they find it's not what they want to do, and they have to change their minds. So even in a field that does connect directly to work, like computer science, we are trying for the same kinds of goals that Gina is trying in her teaching of literature. We're trying to prepare students to adapt. They do not know what's coming next. I also talk to my students about how in computer science we're learning this field so we can solve people's problems. The study is not primarily the machine. The machine is an instrument to solve people's problems. So the real focus of the study is what do people need done? What kinds of problems do people want solved? And in my own study of mathematics and science, it has always been easier for me and more interesting when I connect it to the biographies and the histories of the people who've been involved in this work. So my own degrees are all from engineering schools, but I made a very deliberate effort to come to a liberal arts college and try to encourage my students to take advantage of all that we have to offer there.
Well, so I want to bring up the money issue right away, because I take it that's on people's minds. You've both mentioned the recession. And I take it that a lot of people are going to say something like, look, I can't afford to pay a lot to major in history or French literature. It's just not going to be a good return on my investment. I mean, maybe I you know, if I didn't have these money issues to worry about, that might be a great thing for me to do. But I'm looking at a huge bill to get this degree, and it makes me nervous to think about where that's going to lead me. It'd be one thing if I didn't have to take on a whole bunch of debt. But if I have to take on debt, shouldn't I take on debt in something that seems like it's a better bet overall?
Yeah, I don't think the data bear out that majors in the humanities necessarily come out with lower salaries in their first 5 or 10 years. I think that's a red herring at some level.
Yeah.
But I mean, don't you think that is a concern that people have?
I do. And in our world, a concern, a perception makes it a reality. And whether a 17 or an 18-year-old or a parent, whether we can predict what will emerge from a degree, it's hard to predict that, right? So it's a perception, whether it's the data don't make that true, but no doubt we have to pay attention to it because, again, at least since 2008, but even predating that, we have students who will prospective students visit all of our schools and ask, what will this do for me? How will this take me where I want to go? I don't know if it's so much about the financial side so much as the value, which is the other side of the coin. How can you establish that there's a value in this degree?
I mean, Gina, what are you thinking about this issue? I mean, surely the pocketbook issue is a big one for people, and it's hard to, like I said, it's one thing to imagine studying this stuff when it doesn't put a huge financial burden on you. Yeah. If it does put a huge financial burden on you, it's pretty easy to think instrumentally about things.
Sure. And I think there is in fact, a false narrative about how much English majors earn versus how much psychology majors earn or even biology majors earn. So the data don't bear out that those with majors in the humanities have greatly depressed lifetime earnings relative to those in the hard sciences or math or the professional fields. I think that is a very strong perception on the part of the general public, but it's not completely true. It's not entirely borne out by what we know when we look at earnings. And of course, something that our students really struggle with, a lot of whom are lower income. I mean, Co is a private college, but it's not an elite institution by any means. Most of our students come from families of fairly modest means. And sometimes in those families, frankly, I think there's not a very strong sense of investment, of the value of investing now for the long term. And you know, the research still bears out that those with a college degree are going to have significantly higher lifetime earnings, 1.2 million higher lifetime earnings on average than people without a college degree. So that college degree absolutely has value. But I think the recession has made it hard. I think it's sort of frozen people in this kind of panicky mode where it's harder to take that long-term view, and it's also harder to trust that if in fact you educate yourself broadly and thoroughly and well, so you become someone who has terrific communication skills, who can work on teams, who has great critical analysis skills, which in the real world we call, you know, problem solving. If you're someone who can really walk into a situation and say, what is the issue here? What's at stake? What's the problem and how can we start solving it? If you're that kind of person, that is to say a graduate of a liberal arts college, you know, if you have those skills in fact are going to translate into strong workplace performance. I mean, this is what employers are looking for.
So, Leon, let me ask you, I mean, you know, someone who's not totally on the inside of the humanities, but who's nonetheless there looking at it and dealing with it, do you think the humanities do a good job of presenting their value to people? Do people, I mean, we're talking about all these great skills that come from this and how the data bear out, you know, the value of the humanities. Are the humanities doing their job in reaching students outside that kind of sensibility?
So this is my 30th year at Cornell College, so I've had a long career, and along the way, in times past, I've encountered some professors who took pride in the fact that they had never worked for a company, that they had, you know, they had no knowledge of the work world. And so we have to avoid that, and we're doing a much better job of doing that. I think a remaining challenge for us is to tell students that there's a value in studying history, literature, and languages, but that choice of a major course of study is not the choice of a career. And so that if you've chosen to study literature, then you have to be open to the possibility of other kinds of occupations early on, and you have to look at the horizon widely. So at Cornell College, we've in recent years made great improvements in the office that helps students find these internship opportunities, meet with alumni, visit businesses, see the kinds of organizations where they might find a future after graduation.
I think Leon's point is really a powerful point, that it's important for anyone in any major not to see themselves limited by that major. Their abilities go far beyond that particular discipline. And sometimes they don't know it actually until they graduate or have an internship or go off campus. But I think that is a really brilliant observation and point, that our students shouldn't say, I'm a French lit major, that's all I'm qualified to do, because it goes so far beyond that.
Or even to say, I'm a French lit major, and that's sort of the sum and the totality of who I am. I mean, back to employers, we know that employers don't hire majors. They hire people who have the skills and the aptitudes, the passions that they're interested in. Employers will train new employees in the content area. But I think also, you know, sometimes we put way too much emphasis on the major. So I'm going to say something which I don't know if it's controversial or not. I hope it is.
Bring it on.
So I actually think the value of the major that you get in college is not necessarily the content area at all. It's not that you leave college with a certain body of knowledge and an understanding of a particular methodology. It's that you have learned to go deep in something. And you therefore are then able to go deep And that's what you carry with you for the rest of your life, is that ability to really learn something at a very deep level. I take that to be the real value of the major.
But I guess, I mean, you know, this is something we've touched on here already, but I guess I am a little bit worried of how instrumental we see education, even starting at a very early age, just because I wonder if that's not just misconceiving education altogether. I mean, in other words, like if you think of something like reading, why teach someone how to read? Well, I suppose there are any number of instrumental reasons. You could say, you know, you're going to get a job someday and you'll probably have to, you know, read things at your work, or maybe you're going to have to read an instruction manual or whatever. But it seems odd that you would teach someone reading purely for that instrumental end of that they will need it at their job. It seems like what you want to do is teach reading well, and then if you can read well, you would do certainly well at a job that required reading, as well as you could participate as a citizen because you can read well as you can enjoy things and learn things. And it seems to me that's, to me, what I think of as an educated person overall, is someone who has that set of things, which of course would have a lot of value in the work world and would have, but to aim it in that direction, I wonder if that doesn't somehow throw us off somehow and maybe not even produce the kinds of results that we really want.
Well, and to take it back to the question of the humanities, if there is this decline of interest in the humanities, is there a decline of understanding of the intrinsic value of the humanities completely apart from whatever those transferable skills are? You know, and you hear, you know, that I immediately went to the transferable skills, and it's true. You know, if you're an English major, you know how to think, you know how to communicate, you know how to write, you know how to speak, you know how to research. So really, I mean, the question isn't what can you do with an English major, it's what can't you do with an English major. And yet that's where I immediately went, because I think that's the landscape now, that's the terrain, is there are so many questions in the public discourse about what the value is of a college degree that I think we're all, especially those of the humanities, are sort of, you know, naturally a little defensive. But to go back to the question of what are the humanities for? Well, you know, I think the humanities were for so long literature, history, philosophy, religion. These are the fields that we went to help us understand what it meant to be human. These were the fields that we went to say, this is what makes people tick. This is who we are. And I think more recently, that kind of inquiry, that understanding of who we are has shifted. How do you understand human nature and human behavior? I think, you know, there's been this shift towards the social sciences, towards cognitive psychology and neuroscience to answer those questions about what makes humans human, and more, you know, and more recently to analytics, right? Like there's nothing that we can't answer about society and, you know, and how things work through data analytics. So I think we have given away in the humanities, I think we've ceded some of the explanatory power, the questions that we care most about, to these other fields.
Right.
Let me share some stories here. So I met an alumnus at one of our homecoming events a couple of years ago. He told me he tried one course in computer science and he hated it, and he did poorly, you know, 30 years ago, and he chose a different major, and then he couldn't find a job in that major, and then he found another career field, and 20 years later the company he was working at acquired a piece of software. They passed it around like a hot potato. Who's going to install this? Who's going to configure it? And in the middle of his life he found a talent he didn't know he had. So at 18 years old, I think this is one of the great tragedies. I think Cornell, we're teaching one course in a month, right? If it didn't work out in 1 month, that doesn't mean you're not good at it, and it doesn't mean you won't be interested in it. So these other latent talents and interests may blossom later. And a second story briefly, I met another alumnus who I asked him, what was the highlight of your career at Cornell College? And he said, well, many years ago, I took a course with Herr Connell and I learned German. And I had no particular enthusiasm for this, but the professor was great. I learned more about this. He arranged an opportunity for me to study and live in Germany for a couple of months. And then I went off and I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I developed a career in Texas. And for 20 years, German was a great enthusiasm. I retained the memory of that experience. It made my life richer, but I didn't use my degree. I really don't like that term, use my degree, but I didn't use my degree. For him, though, in midlife, the company formed a partnership with a company in Europe, and he spent 5 years living in Europe, speaking German with his family, growing up and going to a German school. So you just never know where the turn is going to come. I think the big mistake many young people make is they think a career is a master plan. It's a road that's in a straight line with these fixed stops. And most careers are a set of fortunate coincidences.
But I feel like I said, that I worry that they think that in part because they've been conditioned to think that about things. You know, I mean, I think that this issue is perhaps larger than just, say, the humanities. I mean, even I would say with math and science or computer science, you want people who are interested in going deep, as you put it, and have what, or my way of putting this is, you know, I don't want a doctor who is always asking in med school, is this going to be on the exam? Like, I would prefer having one who really wanted to learn as much about biology and everything else as possible. And then you don't know when it's going to become useful for you.
Well, and if you believe sort of the Maya Angelou statement that we find our path by walking it, you have to start walking it, and some of it is a leap of faith, and I mean, so I'm sitting here, I'm listening, I'm thinking, so what are the ultimate goals that we have for our students, right? Critical thinking and powerful oral and written communication. I would even argue that there are deeper, more foundational goals that we have for them. I mean, we want them to have an orientation towards other people.
Yes.
Right? We want them to know that they don't know everything, or they may not know everything. And we want them to be motivated. And I would argue that if they come out of a college experience or set of experiences with those three foundational abilities, and they start walking on that path, they will end up where they want to end up. I really believe that. I mean, deep in my heart.
Yeah, or you know, and I guess I wonder too, if we think of, you know, particular higher education, maybe to what extent can we make it a space where people can wander a little bit until they find their path? In other words, to say you got to be on a path, you know, from the get-go.
It's a circuitous, tortuous path. It's not linear.
Right. So, what about though? You know, are the humanities? I keep coming back to this. Are the humanities and the liberal arts generally doing the best job possible in teaching the humanities and in teaching the liberal arts, or are there things that are problematic? I mean, for instance, I certainly had classes in the liberal arts where it did sort of feel like the whole point of the class was to train me to be simply a scholar in that field, and that it was driven by that, and what would be the point of doing it otherwise. If indeed part of this point is to train us more broadly, shouldn't the approach be a little broader? I know others worry that the humanities sometimes feel as if they have a political agenda that is being, you know, kind of pushed on people, and that can seem a little off-putting, or perhaps even counter to the spirit of what the humanities are about. I guess I'm just kind of curious about, you know, in liberal arts education, are we doing the best we can teaching in the way that is going to make the value of the liberal arts shine forth to students?
That is such a great question. And I think the answer is yes, but part of that, as I say that, I think the answer is we're doing so much better. I mean, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was this divide between professional and the liberal arts, and it's a fiction. And that divide has eroded because they're all interconnected. And as Leon mentioned, the fact that we want our students to have a broad and deep educational experience, and then we want them to start having applied learning experiences out of the classroom. I mean, we spend so much time thinking and talking about how what we are doing will help them, our students, not just while they're in school, but after they graduate in very material ways. So I think we are all so much more focused. I will say, University of Chicago recently, I mean, this is to me one of the purest liberal arts institutions in the country and in the world. They are looking at the humanities departments and saying, show us how what you do makes a difference for our students. That to me is incredible. A sign of how we're self-reflecting.
Gina?
Do you think our institutions probably can do more to communicate the value of those core ethical practices, if you will? So connecting with others, being able to think meaningfully about one's purpose, about how you know what you know, how do you make decisions, how do you figure out what's true, how do you know what's right? I think that it is important that we embrace that, you know, if you have the good fortune to spend 4 years going to college, that part of what you are trying to do is really to develop yourself as an ethical and even a moral thinker. And I think sometimes liberal arts colleges in particular are caught in this tension, on the one hand accused of being too relativistic and not having a strong enough moral core, right? Anything goes. And on the other hand, being overbearingly moralistic, right? Politically correct, and sort of trying to, you know, push a liberal agenda. So what is it? You know, is it, you know, are the liberal arts colleges morally overdetermined, or you know, do not have enough of a moral core? And I'm borrowing here from some ideas of Paul Froese, a sociologist at Baylor University, who says, you know, one of the things that a liberal arts education does is it is in fact a moral education. It really is about helping people figure out how to walk in the world, and that we shouldn't shy away from that. You know, it's okay for us to take on that this is what we do. We train young people in citizenship. We train young people about how to participate in community. And when I talk with my students about transferable skills, and I do not shy away from that, because I do want them to understand that what I'm asking them to do in Shakespeare class, it might feel kind of esoteric, but that I'm actually training them to do things that I really believe is going to have tremendous value to them later in life. I don't just talk about the world of work. I talk about, you know, when you're sitting on the city council, or when you're on the, you know, on the school board, you're going to need these skills of reasoning and persuasion, because this is what we need, you know, in the world we live in, and the world that we're heading towards.
Yeah. Leon, I mean, what about the cultivation of citizenship and education? We sometimes get so focused on jobs. We only have a couple minutes left, but what you have some thoughts about that?
I do. So the college gives me, we've decided among ourselves some educational goals, and that's one of them, and ethical conduct is another. I ask my students to read a code of professional conduct. When they begin with that, they think professional conduct or professional ethics means don't lie, steal, cheat, you know? So we already know that. Let's go to the other part of the code.
Right.
And the other part of the code is about helping junior colleagues. It's the responsibility to keep learning once you're in the profession. It's the obligation to exercise volunteer leadership within the profession. So it's not just don't lie, cheat, and steal. It's all of the other things we're trying to teach in each of our departments.
Right, but it just seems to me that overall we've gotten so focused on education for the sake of the economy. It seems like it's important to remember too that in education we've traditionally embraced as being part of developing a healthy democracy, of having a citizenry that is capable of self-government. Well, I'm afraid that we've run out of time, but I'd really like to thank Leon, Gina, and Jonathon for a really stimulating conversation. I'm hoping that we haven't touched on so many things, but I'm hoping that the conversation we've started here is one that you can continue in your homes and communities. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Ethical Perspectives on the News.
Okay.